Hi, I'm Dan Fishback. I'm a playwright. I'm a member of Jewish Voice for Peace. And I would like to talk to people who see themselves as liberals or on the left, but who have not called for a ceasefire in Gaza. And before I say anything more, I just need to get real with you and say that I'm having a really hard time processing the magnitude of civilian death in Gaza. I'm having a really hard time waking up every morning and seeing the death toll rise. I'm having a really hard time seeing every morning on my social media feed images of dead children, bloody children, screaming families, people screaming into cameras, begging for us to help them. I'm having a really hard time processing that. So having said that, I know that for a lot of liberal people who see themselves on the left, your main priority is the release of hostages who have to be released. They must be released. Israel has murdered thousands of Palestinians, over 1,000 Palestinian children. And they have figured out how to get the release of 4 hostages. So my question, if the hostages are your priority, my question is, how is that ratio going for you? How does that ratio feel for you? I know that some of you believe, this death is sad, but Netanyahu and Biden have some kind of secret plan that there's going to be a positive outcome that they are diligently working towards that will somehow make all of this death worth it. I cannot imagine a legitimate moral framework where this level of civilian death justifies any outcome. That this level of murder of children can justify any outcome. And I find it difficult to imagine Netanyahu as a trustworthy actor. Netanyahu, who I believe is going to be on trial for criminal fraud in his country coming up. I know that some of you who see yourselves as liberal or on the left don't want to call for a ceasefire because you don't want to be part of a movement that includes a radical fringe of people who believe that the targeting and murder of civilians is legitimate decolonial struggle. I loathe this notion that targeting civilians is legitimate decolonial struggle. And the vast majority of people who do solidarity work loathe the targeting of civilians. So many of us are doing this work to avoid civilian death, right? Is there a radical fringe that thinks targeting the civilians is decolonial struggle? Yeah. But think about it this way. You are already in a movement with people who believe that the targeting of civilians, murder of civilians, can be legitimate. If you support this bombardment, even tacitly by not calling for a ceasefire, you are part of a liberal, centrist, conservative, fascist coalition that supports the bombardment. You are in a coalition with people who actively want to see Palestinians murdered. Even on the leftward end of that coalition, you have people who see this level of death and say, that's okay. That's okay. You might make this distinction that, what Hamas did was deliberately kill the civilians, and Israel isn't deliberately killing civilians. And I would say that at this scale, I find it difficult to imagine that you can say that with a straight face. You know, Israel knows when it drops these bombs that civilians will die. At my most generous, I would call that criminal negligence. But I have very little reason to be generous for the Israeli government. I have very little reason to be generous to the Israeli government, whose officials are constantly saying things about how Palestinians are animals. How they don't want them to be there. Just listen to the way they talk about these people. And we're supposed to believe that this level of civilian death constitutes restraint? To me, that seems like an abuse of language. If that's restraint, compared to what? I know some of you might not want to call for a ceasefire, those of you who see yourselves as liberal or on the left, because you don't want to feel like you're in a political movement with people who you really disagree with. Like me, I'm an anti-Zionist. You might find that disgusting. And what I can say to you is I will happily have that argument with you later. It's an emergency. Every morning I wake up and the death toll is higher. We can't get those lives back. I think we can agree. I think we can come to agree quickly now that this isn't worth it, that this bombardment has to stop, that we have to call for a ceasefire. I think we can actually agree about this. And I think that we should put aside our disagreements about the details for later so that we can all call for a ceasefire now. We can talk about all the details later. We have to call for a ceasefire now. It has to happen now. I know you're scared, especially those of you who, like me, are Jewish, are really scared right now. I'm scared too. But I cannot think of a morally legitimate or intellectually sound framework where this level of civilian death makes you or I safer, when the opposite seems much more likely. That the bigger the scale of death, the more we are in danger. Okay? If you need a self-interested argument, there's a self-interested argument for you. But I don't think that we need to even resort to the self-interested argument, because I don't think there's any moral justification for this level of murder, which we are paying for with our tax dollars here in America. So, listen, you need to do what's right for you to be able to live with yourself later about what you did now. And I suspect that you will sit more easily with yourself in the future if you call for a ceasefire now, so that you can remember you did, so you can tell your kids you did. I don't think you'll regret it. I really don't. I know you're scared. But I genuinely do not think that you will regret it. Honestly. So yeah, call Congress, call the Senate, call the president every day. It's a numbers game. They have to know that we're here, that we're angry, and that we need this to stop. And that's it. Everything else can come later. You can explain to me why I'm a piece of shit later. You can tell me that my anti-Zionism is like the most repulsive, self-hating Jew nonsense ever later. That part doesn't matter. Our shared commitment to life is the only thing that matters right now. Okay, that's it. How do I turn this off? Wow, how do I turn this off? Oh,